Welcome to Night Watchers, where every story is a door to something unexpected. I was pulling a late shift at the luxurious Azure Sands Resort. Just another night of wandering through dimly lit halls, checking the pool area, and ensuring everything was as it should be. Or so I thought. It was nearing midnight when I spotted something strange at the pool. A man, one of the guests, was thrashing in the water, arms flailing wildly. My first instinct was to assume he was drowning, a tragic but not uncommon accident in my line of work. But something didn't sit right. The pool area was eerily empty. No other guests, no laughter or splashes, just silence, broken only by his desperate gasps. I rushed to the pool's edge and dove in without hesitation. The cold water sent a shock through me, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I managed to haul him to the deck, his body limp and lifeless. I started CPR immediately, my hands working mechanically as I tried to save him. But as I pressed on his chest, a chilling feeling crept over me. It wasn't the kind of fear you feel when you're unsure if someone will survive. This was different. I glanced around, my instincts on high alert. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Someone, or something, was watching us. Still, I forced myself to focus, counting chest compressions and praying for a sign of life. Then a sound shattered the silence, slow, deliberate footsteps echoing through the pool area. My head snapped up. On the far side of the pool stood two figures, hotel staff. But something was wrong. Their faces were emotionless, their eyes cold and vacant, as if life had been drained from them. They didn't move, just stood there, staring at me with a lifeless intensity that made my stomach churn. This wasn't normal. None of this was. I knew I had to act fast. Whatever was happening, I couldn't stay there. I grabbed the guest's phone from his belongings and managed to dial emergency services with shaking hands. The operator's voice was a small comfort as I stammered out our location. Sirens wailed in the distance, a beacon of hope cutting through the oppressive atmosphere. But relief was short-lived. The two figures began moving, their footsteps echoing louder as they closed the distance. I had no time to think. I hoisted the guest up, his arm slung over my shoulder, and made for the exit. Every hallway we passed through felt suffocating, the walls closing in as if the hotel itself didn't want us to leave. My ears strained for the sound of footsteps, which seemed to multiply behind us. I kept going, refusing to look back, terrified of what I might see. The front doors loomed ahead like a portal to salvation. Just as I reached them, dragging the guest with every ounce of strength I had, the footsteps stopped. Turning slightly, I saw them. 4 staff members now, standing at the end of the hall, their faces devoid of humanity, watching silently as I fled. The ambulance lights painted the night in flashes of red and blue as I burst outside. The paramedics took over, and I collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. But as I sat there, a horrifying thought struck me. Whatever was happening inside the hotel, it wasn't over, and I wasn't sure if I had truly escaped. I knew we had to move, fast. The guest's hand was clammy in mine as I pulled them along, my heart pounding like a drumbeat of survival. Behind us, the eerie figures were closing in, their footsteps growing louder. Panic clawed at my throat, but I pushed it aside. The glowing lights of the ambulance up ahead were like a beacon, piercing through the oppressive darkness. I ran harder, dragging the guest along, desperate to reach safety before the nightmare caught up to us. We burst into the cool night air, collapsing just as the paramedics rushed forward to help. Relief washed over me briefly, but the horror of the night clung to me like a shadow. Whatever was happening back there, it wasn't over. It reminded me of another harrowing experience, one I had tried to bury deep. A dream vacation that had turned into a waking nightmare. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, sailing the high seas on the luxurious celestial wave. For the first few days, everything was idyllic. Bright sunshine, endless ocean, and the blissful escape from everyday life. But then the whispers began. Rumors of an illness spreading among passengers and crew. At first I shrugged it off. People always caught colds on ships. Too much recycled air, too little personal space. But soon, it became impossible to ignore. Passengers disappeared from the pool deck, from the dining halls. The few I saw seemed gaunt, their faces pale and sweat-soaked. In their cabins, muffled coughing and wheezing echoed through the walls. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was seriously wrong. It started with fatigue so intense, it felt like I was carrying the weight of the ocean itself. Then came the nausea, the dizziness. My body betrayed me, forcing me to confront what I'd been dreading. I stumbled to the ship's medical center, gasping out my symptoms to the staff. Their faces were grim. "You've been infected," the doctor said softly. The words felt like a death sentence. They instructed me to isolate in my cabin to avoid spreading the illness further. So I locked the door, sealing myself away from the world, and waited for help. But with each passing day, the virus sank its claws deeper into me. My body weakened, my breath shallowed, and the world blurred around me. When I couldn't bear it anymore, I decided to return to the medical center. If I didn't get help, I wouldn't survive. The halls of the ship were deserted, eerily silent except for the faint creaks of the vessel cutting through the water. Every step felt like a marathon, my legs trembling under my weight. But worse than the physical strain was the dread that coiled in my gut. The ship felt wrong, as if it had come alive in the worst way. And then I heard it. A guttural, animalistic growl echoed through the corridor, freezing me in place. It wasn't human. No cough, no wheeze, no voice could make that sound. My skin prickled with terror as I realized whatever was ahead wasn't just an illness. I had to keep moving. Whatever was behind that growl, I couldn't afford to find out. I couldn't let myself falter, no matter how heavy the air felt or how ominous the growls behind me sounded. My heart thundered as I pushed forward, step by step, through the narrow hallways. Just as the dim light of the medical center flickered ahead, I froze. There it was. A figure stood motionless in the hallway, bathed in the faint cold glow of the emergency lights. Its lifeless eyes bore into me, unblinking. The sight turned my blood to ice. It wasn't just standing there. It was waiting for me. A primal fear kicked in, overriding every rational thought. I turned and ran. My legs moved faster than I thought possible, adrenaline coursing through me as I bolted away from the figure. The walls of the ship blurred past me, the only sounds being my ragged breathing and the distant echoes of something following. When I finally stumbled into the medical center, I collapsed, gasping for air. The doors slid shut behind me with a soft hiss, and for the first time in what felt like hours, I felt a sliver of relief. I was safe, or so I thought. The doctors moved quickly, administering fluids and medication. Their words were calm and reassuring, but no amount of comfort could chase away the feeling gnawing at me. The shadow of unease clung to me, whispering that this wasn't over. I closed my eyes, willing myself to focus on recovery, clinging to the hope that I'd escape this ordeal alive. It was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a journey into the heart of an untouched jungle, surrounded by lush greenery and the sounds of nature. But paradise quickly turned to peril. We had been trekking through dense vegetation when we stumbled upon them. A group of locals emerged from the shadows of the towering trees, their expressions unreadable, but their presence undeniably threatening. At first, I thought they were merely curious about the strangers who had wandered into their territory, but the way their eyes burned with suspicion and the way they clutched their weapons told a different story. I stepped forward cautiously, raising my hands in a gesture of peace. My words faltered as I tried to communicate, the language barrier a wall between us. But it quickly became clear they weren't interested in talking. Their hostility crackled in the air like an unspoken warning. Outnumbered and unarmed, we made the only decision we could: retreat. We turned and began our slow, careful march back through the jungle, hoping to avoid provoking them further. But as we moved, the trees around us felt suffocating, their shadows alive with unseen eyes. We weren't alone. Just when we thought we had put enough distance between us, chaos erupted. Arrows whistled through the air, narrowly missing us. Shouts echoed, a cacophony of anger and aggression. My heart sank as I realized we were being hunted. With no choice but to fight, we grabbed whatever we could: branches, rocks, anything that could serve as a weapon. The jungle became a battlefield, the air thick with tension and the smell of fear. But we were losing. It wasn't just the locals we were up against. It was the jungle itself, their ally in this deadly game. Just as despair threatened to consume me, a miracle arrived. Voices called out, foreign but familiar, and figures emerged from the trees, rescuers armed and determined. They fought back our attackers, buying us precious seconds to escape. We didn't hesitate, following them as they carved a path through the dense foliage. Every step felt like an eternity, but eventually the jungle began to thin, the oppressive shadows giving way to the open sky. When we finally broke free, gasping for breath and covered in scrapes and bruises, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But as I turned to look back at the jungle, a chill ran down my spine. We had escaped, yes, but we had trespassed into a world that wasn't ours, and the jungle never forgets.